Hello and welcome. This video is going to be a nice brief introduction to using YarnSpinner in a Unity project. I did a stream about a year ago and uploaded it to YouTube and kind of forgot about it. Come back a couple of months later and there's about 1,300 views and a few people asking some questions on some things I did. So I thought I'd do this tutorial and hopefully help some people out. There is a project on GitHub that you can download to follow along with. So suck it down and follow along. You can use it in your own project, but it might be just easier to use this as a guide as we go through. So just an example of the project that we have here. Some UI over here that has some option buttons ready for Yarn. There's a continue button for when the line of dialogue is ready to continue. We'll just hide that for now. Here we have player character that we'll be using and a couple of NPCs that we can interact with. And look, there is nothing spectacular in this game. It's just a moving sprite basically, and we can come up and interact. So when we're in range of the NPC, we'll be able to open the dialogue. So what we're going to want to do is download YarnSpinner into our Unity project. And the best way to do that is using the package manager via Git. This is quite new in Unity as of I think 2019.3ish, something like that. But it is very cool and very funky. So let's head to YarnSpinner's website. We want to install for Unity. And if we scroll down, it'll have the link here for the Git to install in the package manager. So we'll copy that. Switch back to Unity and open up your package manager. Over here we can add Git, paste it in, and it will go ahead and download what it needs to. This might take a few minutes depending on your internet and blah blah blah, but once you're in, let's continue on. Okay, mine is now finished downloading. You'll see Secret Lab is an option here within the package manager. Underneath is YarnSpinner. What we're going to want to do is install the sample so we can check it out and see what's happening. So go ahead and import the sample data. What you'll find is in the project, we'll have some samples here. And let's go ahead and open up the space scene. Alright, so I'm just going to change this down to something we can see. So very similar to the scene I had before. There's some UI with some buttons and a continue button. Let's just play this and see what we do. Alright, so we can move along. Once we're near an NPC, I think you can hit spacebar. Yep, and here's the talk. Okay, so, hey Sally. Oh hi. You snuck up on me. Don't do that. Yeah, so the cool thing with Yarn obviously is the branch dialogue. So we have some options here of what we can say next. So anything happening on your watch? Sally says, no, not really. Same old Nebula doing the same old thing. The ship wanted to see you, go say hello. Alright, cool, let's go say hello to the ship. I mean, you get the idea. If you're here, you probably know what Yarn does, right? But let's crack open the scene and actually see what's happening. So we've got this thing called Dialogue Runner. The Dialogue Runner is, I guess, the main core of Yarn. It's the thing that that ticks over all the conversations and the dialogue files. There's not really a lot that you need to configure for this. It's just more you need to have it in the scene. Ready to go. Underneath we've got the dialogue UI. Now this thing is pretty important to configure if you're going to do it from scratch, because you'll need to hook up a few events for the scene so it knows what to do. We'll go into that in a bit more detail when we run our own scene though. The other thing we'll do is we'll check out the Yarn files, and these are basically the conversation files that is happening. They have this under the dialogue section. So we have Sally and ship. Okay, and if we open these up, you can either use the Yarn editor tool, or you can just open it in something like VS Code or some text editor. If it's a fairly big dialogue, it's going to be a lot easier to see the flow of conversation using the Yarn editor tool, and we'll just check that out. Website for that is yarnspinnertool.github.io, Yarn editor. Alright, we'll just open up. Alright, so here we see Sally. Sally has a few different options in her conversations. So she has a watch and a sorry, and if we crack open the main Sally, you'll see that this is an option here that if we choose this particular string of dialogue, it's going to go to the node sally.watch. And that node is over here, and it will continue the conversation from there. You can imagine if you've got a fairly in-depth tree for this particular NPC, it's going to be a lot easier visually to do that using this editor rather than a text editor. Right, so now what we're going to do, I think we'll review what NPCs we have in our test scene, and we'll create some dialogue for them. So let's review what NPCs we have so that we know what sort of conversations we're going to need to do. So back in the scene, let's bring back open the example. And here we have the player. We have Billy, Susie, and Zombie. So let's start with Billy. And just for this, we'll use the online editor tool. So we're going to say new yarn file. Yes, please. And this one we'll call, let's call this Billy.start. And for his conversation, let's just say, Billy says, "Hi Jamie," and Jamie is the player character. "How are you today?" And Yarn has some shorthand for the options, for the text options. So if we do just this sort of dash greater than symbol, that it's like a shorthand to say that this is an option. So one option we can say is fantastic, and the response to that will be, Billy, oh wow, I wish I was doing that good. Important thing to note is the tab after this line. When Yarn does the processing, it will know that it needs to run this line of text after this option. If that's not there, it's just going to do all of the following text sequentially. The other option is Jamie will say, so, and Billy's response will be, I think I'll leave that alone. Okay. And that's it. Let's save that into our project. Save as yarn file, and we'll just make a folder called dialogue. And we'll call this one Billy. Okay, I'm going to create the rest of the conversations for the other NPCs. You don't have to sit here and watch me do it, but if something important comes up, I'll just stop at that point and let you know what's happening. Right, so what we're going to do here is create two branches of conversations. So when the player selects an option of dialogue, the conversation is going to be split into two different paths. Now to do that, what you need to do is the two square brackets here, and it's going to automatically fill that in for us, which is nice. But for some reason we've got some additionals here, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the pipe operator is going to be the text that's presented to the player. So not particularly. And then on the right-hand side is going to be the name of the node that this option is going to go to. So this node hasn't been created yet, but the editor is pretty cool because if you type it in and you exit out of the edit mode for this node, it will create that node for you. So right, so I'm going to continue typing this up and then come back once I'm finished so you can see the nodes branch. Right, so once we finish typing that, and if we just exit out of the node editing, you'll see it's straight away created these two branches, or these nodes I should say. So that's pretty cool. Alright, well I'm going to continue typing this in and continue on. Okay, now that the dialog is done, we need to add the dialog runner and dialog UI to our UI. So let's open our UI up, we'll add a component and let's look for dialog runner. While we're here, we'll add in the dialog UI. Okay, now I probably could have named my own dialog UI class something different, but you know, I didn't. First we'll configure the runner. We also need to add in a variable storage. So let's do that. And we'll make the links. And we'll untick this start automatically. We don't really want any scripts to be starting when this kicks off. Next we'll configure the UI. In the options button, this is where we're going to link up these three option buttons. So let's dig into our UI options and add in, so we'll just pin that, add these three and drop them on. Fantastic. Unpin and go back here. Right. The other thing that we need to do is we need to tell our continue button that when it is clicked, that it's going to continue for the next line of dialogue. So let's do that and register an event for our dialog UI. Dialog UI, mark line complete. Right, that's all we need to do with that one. We'll go back to the dialog UI. And there's quite a few settings we have to change here for these events, such as hiding and showing the continue button when the line of dialogue has started and finished. There's quite a few things here to configure, so I think we'll just go down from the top. The first thing is start. I don't really have anything in there that I want, but I do want something to happen when the dialogue's finished. So what I've done is in my player code, which I'll bring up, on this interact, I've got it set here to set a flag that it's in dialogue. What that is doing is for the move code, if it's in dialogue, we're not gonna get any movement input. So if we're in the dialogue and we're still moving the arrows or moving the character around, that character's not actually going to be moving anywhere. So it's like an early out if we're in dialogue. But what I do want is to set this back again once we're out of dialogue. So let's make a little method here on dialogue and let's just set that is in dialogue false. I'm just going to leave this as a method rather than a public variable, because there might be other things down the line that you might want to do with it, and I think it's probably a better way to go. So once we save that, wait for that to compile. There we go. And we're going to add in the player. We're going to add in on. I didn't make it public, so we're going to make that public. Dialog end. Alright, cool. So the next one is on the line start. And what we're going to want to do here is hide the continue button. Next is online finish. So two things we'll want to do here. The first thing is we want to show the continue button again, and we want to select it. So if you're using, say, arrows or something for your UI or a controller, D-pad, that sort of thing, that button is only going to be selected. And if the user hits a select button, then that button will trigger. So I'll add two events here. Show the continue button. Tick that. And button select. Fantastic. All right, next is online update. This is where we're actually going to set the text for the dialog. So we're going to add event there, go to the text panel, drop in the text element, and set this to text. And that's all we need to do. The dialog UI script will do the rest for us, which is great. Online end, I don't have anything in here for now, but options start. This is where we want to show the options button. Hide the continue button and select the first options button. So on options start, I'll add the two events here. Hide the continue button and select the first button. Right. Now what we want to do is hook up a reference to the dialog UI from our dialog UI, and yes, that is confusing. Don't name yours dialog UI. So let's bring that open in Visual Studio, right, and we're just going to make a public reference to it here. Save that, come back, and let's link up that reference. Now we'll make a reference for the MPC dialog inside the MPC script. Okay, and what we're going to need is to know which node to start on. So let's make a serialized string. And we'll just call that yarn start node. Defaults to start, but yeah, obviously we'll change that for each MPC. And we'll also make a serialized reference to the yarn dialog file, and that is a yarn program class. Okay, now that we have a reference to it, we need to inject it into the YarnSpinner tool. And to do that, we can call our reference to our dialog UI. And because it's a singleton, we can go instance, dialog runner, and add that yarn dialog. Okay, let's save that. We'll also add this to our player class as well. I mean, you could get funky and create a separate mono behavior for this, but for the point of the example. Save. Okay, now we need to tell Yarn to spin up our dialog UI once we engage it. So down here I've got the interact. Now instead of the show that we've got, we'll get rid of that. call it from our reference on the singleton. Dialog runner, start node, no, start dialog, that's the one. Okay, this is going to take in a string of a start node. If you remember when we created the dialogues, we called the first node start dot name of the NPC, so start.billy, start.susie, start.zombie. And this is how Yarn is going to know where to start the conversation. So in order to do that, let's go back into our NPC script, and this start node, we're going to make that public. Actually, let's scratch that. Let's make a property instead. Get return yarn start node. Right. Okay, so we can simply just pass in the active NPC active yarn start node. Save that, save the NPC. Let's go back and hook up the dialogue. Actually, the player won't need its own Yarn dialogue because it's really the one that instigates all the chat. So we'll just quickly take that out of the player. And start node. Right. Now we can go to the NPCs, go into the dialogue, and we'll hook them up. And we'll call the start node start.billy. Start.susie. Start.zombie. Save the scene. I've just discovered I made a mistake in the name of the nodes here. So if we have a look on the Yarn files, we check out Billy, we can see over here that there's one node and it says billy.start. Yeah, if I go into Billy and the start node, I've put start.billy. So let's just change that back and do the same for the others. And the other thing that we'll need to do is back on the dialog UI, there is this container, dialog container, and that's basically the UI container that shows the dialog. We can just reference that itself there, so it's its own game object. Now in that our own custom dialog UI script, I've got just this hide and show methods here that is going to become redundant now. We don't really need that because the YarnSpinner's dialog UI is going to handle that for us, so we can change that and save. And all going well, this should actually work. Let's check it out. Huh? Okay, we have our two options here. Brains. We have text. However, you may notice that the speaker name text didn't change and the portrait aren't changing either. So let's tackle that. Now we're going to extend the basic dialogue functionality a little bit. We want to do a couple of things. One is set a portrait sprite for the speaker. And we're also going to want to have a couple of different options for different emotions so that we can show what they're feeling in that line of dialogue. The other thing is to actually set the name onto the UI to show in a separate spot who is speaking. So to do that, we're going to create a scriptable object for each speaker and set that data in. So let's create a new script and we'll call it speaker data. Okay, we're going to want this to be a scriptable object. And we'll create an asset menu for it. Okay, so just to make it easy on ourselves for the assets that we have, we'll just have a look at what we've got for the characters. The art, Kenny, and Toon. Let's just say female adventurer. Okay, so we have these three basic emotions here. So I'm going to call this one neutral, this one's focused, and this one is shocked. Right. So we're gonna sort of leverage that in our script. We're gonna make a couple of strings for emotion neutral. Focused and shocked. Okay, we're also going to want to know the speaker name. As well as some references to their sprites for the portraits. Okay, don't need any of this. Now the other thing we're going to do is just have a little helper function here that's going to return what sprite we're looking for based on the emotion that we're displaying. So let's just quickly type that up. Neutral. Okay, done. Let's create these this data for each NPC we have. I'll just make a new folder here for speakers. And we can create our new asset now, dialogue, speaker. And let's start with Billy. And we'll just duplicate that a couple of times. And we can do Susie and Zombie. We also need one for our player, which is Jamie. Okay, and let's just fill in this information. That's all very well and good that we've got this data, but how do we actually get it into our UI? To do this, we're going to use something that Yarn gives us, where we can inject a particular method into their command handlers. So the documentation here basically has an example where this add handler has a string of camera look, and it's going to run this method, camera look at target, whenever Yarn sees this particular command. Let's open up our dialog UI script, and we'll add in a database of our speakers to start with. So we'll use a dictionary, and as our key we'll use just basically their name, so a string, and the data will be the speaker data we created before, and we'll call that speaker database. And we'll just initialize that straight away. Now we'll also need to get a reference to the dialog runner. So to do that, we'll create a public reference to it up the top here. Runner. We'll make that a property, I think. Okay, because we probably will need to access this later on. We can get rid of that. And we'll get the component on start. I'm just going to interject, when we get a reference to the dialog runner, we're going to want to do that in awake. It's just like a scheduling thing, because the dialog UI closes the game object. It doesn't have time for the registrations to work, so we'll just change that to awake. Let's add a method to add these speakers into the database. So I'll make a public void add speaker, which takes in the speaker data. First we'll do a simple check to make sure it doesn't exist. Okay. If it does exist, we'll just give ourselves a warning. Okay, otherwise, let's add it in. Actually, we'll better return out of here. Now we'll add it into the database. Okay, and to add this in, we'll add this in on the NPC and the player script. So we're going to need a reference to that data file. And on start, we'll add it in. Okay, we'll also do this for our player. Okay, now in the dialog UI, now that we have this, we want to have a command that changes our UI based on the data or based on the speaker, I suppose. So let's create a method here for set speaker info. Now this will be the command that we're going to inject into Yarn's command handler. And if you remember from the documentation, this needs to take in a string, an array of strings. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the first string in the array to be the speaker, so the speaker's name. And what we'll do is we'll set the second string to be the emotion. If you remember when we set the emotions up on the MPCs, we had on the speaker data, we had this default one as neutral, and when it returns a sprite, the default is going to be neutral. So what we'll do here to make things a little bit easier on ourselves is to make it so that we don't always need to pass in the neutral emotion. So that way then we can just say set speaker name without having to type in the neutral emotion all the time. Okay, so what we're going to do actually, we're going to check the length of the array that was passed in. And if it's greater than 1, I'm going to set it to that second string in the array. And just for safety check, otherwise we'll set it to the neutral emotion. Okay, now that we have the name, let's query our database and pull out its data. If we don't have it, let's give ourselves an error. However, if we do, let's set that information that we've got on our UI. Okay, done. Okay, we just want to add a return on here as well, otherwise it'll fall through and give us this error all the time. Now what we need to do is we need to inject this command into the dialog runner, and again we'll do this on start after we get a reference to it. Add command handler, and we want so you see here string is the command name, so this is the command name that we'll use in Yarn. So when we're editing the Yarn file, so the dialog file, and we want to add this command in to set the speaker info, this is the command name that we'll use. So what we'll call it is let's say set speaker, right, and we'll send it set speaker info. Alrighty, fantastic. In order for this to work though, we're going to need to edit the dialog files. So, like I said before, you can use Visual Studio Code to edit the Yarn files directly. And for this particular instance, it's probably going to be quicker than going into the Yarn editor. Because we've already made the dialogues, we just need to tweak it a little bit. So let's spin open the yarn files. Okay, so here's Billy's yarn file in Visual Studio Code. As you can see, here's the dialogue. What we want to do is we want to, for each line of dialogue, we want to run a yarn command, which is what we've just created, to set the speaker and to set the emotion. Now, to set a yarn command, you simply just do these two arrows, set speaker. Now this is just simply a string, and this is a string that we set here. So we could call this set speaker info, set speaker data, doesn't matter as long as they match. It's very important that these two match, otherwise the command's not going to work. So set speaker, and the first string is going to be the name, so Billy. Again, this string, being a string, has to match exactly, otherwise it's not going to work. And we can do emotions. So for this one, we'll just use neutral anyway, which we don't need to set because it is the default. Because we're doing this, we don't really want to have Billy's name in the line of dialogue because it's going to be shown up on the UI that we set before. So we can get rid of that. This stays. And to make the flow of conversation seem a bit more natural, and to show Jamie's portrait, we'll add some extra dialogue in here as well. So now we're going to set speaker to Jamie, and she is going to say, oh my god, I am like so amazing today. Thanks so much for asking. Okay, now Billy's there. Again, take away his name. Okay, and that's the end of that dialogue tree, that branch. Otherwise, we have this option here for so-so. Again, same thing, we're going to add an extra line here for Jamie. And this time, Jamie can say, well, to be honest with you, I'm really not feeling very positive about life. Okay. What we can do here is we'll actually change Jamie's expression to focused. We'll change to Billy. Okay, and Billy can have a shocked expression, right? And we can take his name away. Okay, and we'll save this. Jump back into Unity. And now let's run this, and we'll go talk to Billy. Whoops. We need to add the speaker data. So, we'll go here. Speakers, Jamie, Billy, Susie, and Zombie. Hey Billy, what's happening? And we have the name, and we have his expression. Alright, fantastic, so-so. Let's go so-so. So notice the expression has changed here. And his expression has changed as well. So there we have it. That's how we can set Yarn to use custom data for setting profile pictures and names and that sort of thing. I mean, so much can be expanded with that. Also spoke to the developers, and there's a version 2.0 coming out very shortly, which should add a lot more options to the dialogue UI. So when that comes out, I might do an update vid as well. All right, cool. We're done. Any questions? Yeah, throw them in the comments and let me know. Anything else you want to know, shoot through and I'll see what I can do for you. Cheers.